Welcome to Passioneer Magazine The Podcast, where you'll hear inspirational stories, encouraging news, and in-depth interviews with authors, influencers, CEOs, and thought leaders. Passioneer Magazine The Podcast. Bold ideas, brave pursuits, boundless inspiration. And hello, Dr. Xanthe. Thank you so much for being here with me on Passioneer Magazine, the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you, Dr. Angela.
Absolutely. And especially for the topic that we are talking about today. What you do and the work that you are doing is so very important. Now, before we get into that, I realize that I may be introducing you to some new listeners or some new viewers who are unfamiliar with you and the work you do. So, first question, tell us just a little bit about yourself. What makes you you?
Thank you. Well, I've spent my career working for human rights and in particular for women and girls. I started out 25 years ago working in international development. My first job was with the World Bank. And then from there, I worked with civil society organizations. I started a nonprofit for girls' education in East Africa called Advancing Girls' Education in Africa. I did that for 10 years. I did some policy work in different places. And then I started a newsroom focused on women and girls called the Fuller Project. And then I joined the Freedom Fund, which we're going to talk more about today, which is the collaborative fund working to stop modern day slavery.
Oh my goodness. I know someone's going, oh wow, she's busy. Exactly. That's why I could not wait to talk to you today. Because, like I said, you're doing very important work. And when people think of slavery, it seems to be a very kind of distant past. Either if one's country has dealt with slavery, or they think of that biblical sense of like building the pyramids. The fact that something called slavery is still going on today, I think definitely needs to have some attention brought to it. So, for listeners who are trying to understand this scope of modern slavery, how has the landscape changed over the past decade in terms of exploitation and the things that are happening?
So, first, talking about the term modern slavery, it's a term that's been used internationally to galvanize attention, to get people's attention, and to think about the different ways that people are forced into doing things or coerced or sometimes tricked. Sometimes there's physical force involved, but sometimes it's mental. And so it can come in different forms. It can be extreme child labor, it can be intergenerational bondage, it can be forced marriage. So we've got these different, it can be sex trafficking, which is what people think of more often at first. So how has it changed over 10 years? I mean, a really important aspect is that it is actually growing. There are more and more instances, and that's something we need to be aware of because the forces that create modern day slavery, it really has to do with vulnerability. So um, there are 50 million people in some form of modern day slavery today. That's 10 million more than there were about 10 years ago. So the growth is pretty significant.
Oh my goodness. I don't think that people are really able to wrap their heads around the numbers that you're thinking, oh, a few people have gone missing, or, we hear about these horrible situations of women or children being found in a particular place. But when you say that number, like millions of people, you just go, what? Absolutely. What? That's a major city in the United States, just missing, gone, being trafficked or being used and abused every single day. That is just mind-blowing.
Dr.
No,
Angela, I'm glad that you brought up the numbers because actually a colleague crunched some of these numbers with me, and 50 million is equivalent to 1 in 150 people, which is the highest number in history. And in the US, there's 1 million people, and that's equivalent to 3 in 1,000. So it's like you said, it's hard to get your head around, but it's quite significant.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can just I think for the people who live in major cities, being Long Beach, LA, Chicago, Miami, Orlando, right? The places, New York, the places where your population is over 1 million people, it's kind of easy for you to visualize that because it's imagine if the whole city was just gone, if it was just poof, everyone. For someone who grows grows up in a very rural place, it's really hard, right? Because they're like, what's 1 million people? Our town has 10,000 people or 100,000 people. So it really does need to the numbers need to be pushed. People need to see it. Thank you for putting it in those terms because that's concrete. That's something that you can always Google. What does 1 million people look like? Or we think a football stadium. That's one way that I explain it when I look at like my radio numbers and I go, this many people are listening. What football stadium is this in the United States? And you go, my goodness, that's crazy. So if you can imagine University of Hawaii or University of Michigan or any of your favorite schools, right? And that football stadium of people are being affected every day. Mind blowing. Oh my goodness. Now, you have called this moment a reckoning, which it definitely should be. What specifically is being exposed right now that you think we need to really draw more attention to?
Thank you. Well, the international aid system has changed dramatically, as we know. US funding cuts have affected people around the world, and it's not just the US because there are other countries as well, in Europe especially, where they're pulling back development funding and putting more money into security funding. And so as that happens, we've got people around the world who are facing programs being cut, health programs, education, nutrition, etc. That vulnerability is on the rise, and it's when people are desperate that trafficking really goes up, whether because they sign up to do something that they know is dangerous but maybe they don't know how dangerous, or whether because families make decisions that aren't well informed or aren't good, for individual family members, but they feel they have to do for the survival of the bigger group. So that's one side. The other side is that there are a lot of people involved in this project of philanthropy, right? People like Mackenzie Scott, who is now the world's most important trust-based philanthropist, but also biggest philanthropist. She gave $7 billion, more than $7 billion away last year, which is twice the amount of the other leading philanthropists like Gates and Bloomberg and Buffett. So, and people are also seeing that and emulating that trust-based giving. So it is a moment of reckoning where there's less money, hopefully some newcomers, but there's less money in the global system. And so we need to do better. Whatever we've been doing, whatever lessons, now is the time to put them into place. And for Freedom Fund, what that means is getting the money to the front lines. We've got to get it to the people who are in those communities, who are seeing those forced marriages, seeing those kids pushed into domestic servitude because they know how to stop it. So if we can efficiently get those dollars to them, those dollars are going to go much, much further than they ever have before.
Mhm, mhm. Now, for someone who might be saying, you guys are talking philanthropy and Mackenzie is giving billions of dollars. I wish that I could. Um, I'm on a different budget. I only make, Dr. Xanthe, I only make $30,000 a year. There's no way in a lifetime that I would ever be able to give in that same capacity. For the person who can only give $5 or only give $20, is that still philanthropy work? Does that still count? Does that still matter?
1000%. I mean, that's what makes the world go around, is
Yeah.
each person doing what they can. And it matters hugely to have people with you. When you give a $5 gift, you're effectively joining a movement. You're raising your hand, you're saying, I'm a part of this. You get signed up for a newsletter often, or maybe you do take both actions, and you go and you might tell people, hey, yeah, I'm a donor, I'm a supporter of this group, these are people that I follow. The other thing that you can do that doesn't cost money, it costs time, right? Which is one of the things that we have to offer, and sometimes more important than money is just sharing this information. I mean, we really are. I think nonprofits are moving more in this direction as they need to of building communities. For a local nonprofit, very often there's a built-in community. Maybe you have a local arts center or a shelter, but for an international nonprofit, it's tough to build community. And so when people sign up to socials and they share and they post, you know, could be 10 or 100 or 1,000 people who see the work because of you. And like we've talked about, Dr. Angela, there's a lot of awareness raising to do on this issue. So everybody can participate in this issue.
Mhm.
Just share it with someone, just tell someone about it. Just repost something and say this feels important.
Mhm. That was going to be my suggestion as well, as it costs you nothing. You're already on socials. Just repost it, just share it, just send it to someone. Or you never know, maybe how you can be that middle person or be the person that makes a difference in your community is that you curate, information like this and you say, "Hey, every Wednesday or Friday, pick your day, I'm going to share about a cause, and this cause is important to me, and I'm going to share this out. Did you guys know that this is going on?" So, what a wonderful way, because everything does matter. Absolutely everything matters. Oh wow! Now, when we look at the economics of it all, how does economic instability or even migration patterns intersect with the rise of trafficking, or does it? Let me ask that way.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It does. Absolutely. Vulnerability is what creates the conditions for trafficking. And there is a correlation with migration, but I don't want people to get confused. I mean, migrants are more likely to be trafficked because they are more likely to be vulnerable. So it does show up more often, 3 times more often in migrant populations. And I think that's been conflated with anti-immigration ideas, but that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is anywhere where we see real vulnerability, and so, with empathy, you can imagine somebody who has fled, from a terrible situation, has crossed a border, is applying for asylum but doesn't yet have paperwork. That person is extremely vulnerable. That is an extremely vulnerable person. So it's, regardless of what a country's policy is on migration, and countries need to, set their policies. Um, if there's no helpline for someone who's being abused, then, then if there's no helpline where they know that they can say, I'm being exploited, I'm being trafficked, I'm in danger, then this is going to grow, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a silenced population effectively. So yes, there's a parallel, I think, with economics. So I can talk a little bit about I can give some examples of this. So, for example, Freedom Fund works in different places. One of those is in Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia, I just came back actually from visiting the program. We do 2 different kinds of work. One is called working on child domestic work issues. So, kids whose families are in rural areas and they send usually a girl to go work in the urban area in somebody else's home. It could be like a distant relative. And the promise is this child will work a bit, but then they'll get to go to school.
Mm.
What happens though is that in many cases the child ends up facing severe abuse, as in working 14-hour days, not eating proper meals, not going to school, and there may be no telephone communication. So the sending family just doesn't even know what's happening, but they're doing it because in their home area they don't have the money to send their own kid to school. So they're doing their best to make a good decision, but it's actually now the child is in serious harm's way. And so one of the ways that our partner, so Freedom Fund, I should explain, we work by supporting these frontline partners. So in Ethiopia, we have many partners who are in those front lines. And one of the things that our partners will do is help that family in the rural area to develop their livelihoods so that they don't need to send the kid, away in search of a better life.
Oh my goodness. As you were sharing that, it just really made me think about how parents really do their very best. And I'm sure if we talk to an elder, a senior person long enough, there's a story. Because boomers are still alive and some are in their 90s or so. There's a story about someone who lived, like you said, in a rural area that sent someone to the bigger city hoping that their lives would be different, or just praying that it would not be the struggles that they had to go through, and it ends up just being more of a nightmare than that dream or that vision that they thought. And that just not having that communication, oh my goodness, I just think of, the moms whose hearts break when they find out that it was not what they thought, and they've put their poor little one, their daughters, in harm's way. When we find out about those things, I really think that people do need to speak up, and they need to share what an eye-opening experience. I don't think that people realize that in that innocence that there is this future trauma that is going to happen, and thinking that someone is helping, that they're actually causing a bigger harm. Wow. Now, when we talk, you mentioned the reduction in some of the funding, and in today's climate, unfortunately, things are not being funded the way that they used to, and that's not just here in the States. This is globally. We're seeing that money is a little funny in every country. With that being said, and please update me if this number is no longer correct. I believe a $60 billion, that's with a B, reduction here in the United States as far as global aid is concerned. What are some immediate or even long term consequences that we need to really focus in on?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that we have a full account of the consequences yet. And also some programs are reconstituting themselves. So we're going to have to see the full account of history of how much was cut and then how much is sort of put back together. But we know that very, very significant cuts to everything from programs that were supporting HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment, and again, health and nutrition. And um so I know from Freedom Fund, from our experience, I think that's probably where I can speak the best. When there was an aid freeze, you know, we were fortunate because we had received a Mackenzie Scott gift. And so we were able to keep that money going until
Mhm.
the freeze ended. And then we were able to push that money back. So um, we're in a very unusual position in that sense because in the trafficking space, we're fortunate that we had those reserves, that we were able to do that. And for many of our partners, they told us that we were the only funding organization of theirs that was able to do that.
Wow.
So, there is a consolidation going on in the nonprofit space, a lot of discussion about organizations that need to merge or need to shut down,
Mhm.
and we've seen that in the global anti-trafficking space and the US serving space as well. Um, but these are overlapping issues,
Mhm.
and um, trafficking is interwoven with human rights, women's rights, climate change. And so, I think the other lens I could speak to is a women and girls lens,
Yeah.
where we're seeing more governments that are more authoritarian and less human rights focused and less focused on women and girls. We're just going to see weaker societies. And if we see more warfaring activities, we see more damage to communities, it's women who are on those front lines. So, you know, it is all a system. It does, need to be built back. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what is the way and what's the role of private philanthropy in doing that. Um, but again, meanwhile, I guess if there is any silver lining of that, it is, those organizations on the ground, on the front lines, they're the ones that need support. They need visibility. They need better connectedness with the
Mhm.
international philanthropy sector. Actually, just came back from Skull World Forum in Oxford, which is probably the biggest gathering for social entrepreneurs or, people like me and funders who want to see social change. And there was a real understanding that the international system has long talked about the need for people use the term proximate leadership, leadership closer to the ground if we're talking about international work out, in the countries where the work is actually happening. And some long timers who've been in the field for 20, 30 years saying, we've been talking about this forever, you know. But I will say there were more people than I noticed when I went 4 years ago who individual funders who they got access because it's exclusive. You have to pay quite a lot of money to get there. And they used their power to bring someone with them from the field, and so they were purely there networking in order to promote that other leader who had flown in from, say, Tanzania or wherever, to make sure that they would get better networked and better connected.
Mhm. As you were talking, I am sitting here thinking of the person who may be listening. Now, of course, our listening audience is so diverse, and it tends to be more CEOs and leaders that are more able to contribute than others. But for the person who again is just that, I have a 9 to 5, I'm just an everyday, Joe, everyday Jane. When you mentioned how you had to tap into that reserve, and I'm thinking that's where that $5 really comes into play, that you are able to that $5 put aside every time you give, and millions of people giving that $20 or that $5 and putting that aside, how that really does compound, and when you need it, it's there. And
100%. 100%. Yeah.
oh my goodness, that kind of gives, to me, that kind of gives you a future sense of hope that it doesn't always have to be the big guys, though we love the big guys stepping in, making a difference. Little guys and gals also can make a huge difference there as well.
Absolutely. And that's the individual giving. Actually, individual giving is the most important kind of giving. It's two-thirds of all of the giving is coming from individuals. And
Uh,
sure, some people can make big gifts, but what's really important is having having people who give and stay with you. So let's say, if the nonprofit knows, hey, we have this many people and they're giving 5 or 10 or $20, but they give every year, then
mhm.
that becomes something you can kind of count on because the foundation gifts you can't count on, you know,
Yeah,
and they often come with strings attached. And so it's
yeah.
actually really important to have those individuals who are just saying, I trust you to make
Mhm,
the hard decisions and, here's my vote in dollars.
mhm, mhm. There's nothing like that genuine pledge of I'm just going to help. And every single dollar does matter. Now, let me put in a little disclaimer here. She's not asking me to talk about money. This isn't something that was a part of the conversation. It's just how can we make a difference? And I am very much about finding a cause that is important to one's heart
Yeah.
and fully supporting that cause. Now, of course, we talk about women's leadership here and the ways in which we can help women be the best women that they could be, whatever industry that they are in. And if this is something that you're finding is really kind of pulling on your heartstrings, then find out more, figure out how you can help, and how we are saying it, either your time, as we would say in church, your time, your talent, or your treasure is always important. And if this is mattering to you in any way, figure out how you can do a little bit more. Now, let me kind of switch back to my questions here for you. And that is, what are the most effective prevention strategies that you're seeing emerge globally? Now, if it seems like there's something that's working more here in the States, then of course share that with us.
Great. I'm glad you asked about prevention. That is another way that the field has changed over 10 years. So 10 years ago, I think there was a more focus on rescuing.
Uh,
And, and the idea of rescuing, I think, is emotionally compelling, of course. People hear about horrible situations and you'll see news stories where people have been rescued. But the long, hard work is actually in the prevention. And both are important, but the long, hard work is prevention. And so some of the strategies that we see working, for example, in again, I'll take us back to Ethiopia because it's so fresh in my mind. One of the programs that we have there is called Safer Migration, and it's about women who actually choose to go to Saudi Arabia or other countries in the Middle East often, and they work in homes as nannies and cleaners and um, these women are choosing to do this because they have a child they would need to support. They hear that the situation will be better. There are recruiting agencies who sometimes are sugarcoating things to an extreme degree, and they're going to get them a passport and they're going to get on an airplane for the first time, and the whole thing seems kind of shiny. But then when they get there, they face extreme abuse. Not, I mean, there are many stories, and when they get back, it takes a long time to get through the trauma and to get back on their feet. And so this is a form of modern slavery where they find themselves without a passport. When they get there, it's confiscated. They don't have the right to change employers. They have difficulty leaving the country. There are all kinds of things happening. And so one of the things that we do is work with the government and civil society and the recruitment agencies, get a data system that's monitoring what's actually happening and who's going where. And we support survivors of this modern slavery who are in networks around the region who keep track of the women when they go so that, if they need to reach out to their embassies and get help, there's somebody tracking them, there's someone available to them. And then we provide alternative forms of training for employment and that sort of thing. Um, so this is a way of, sorry. Ooh. So, so this is a way that we can help women to just be better informed. And I have to tell you, Dr. Angela, it was so moving to listen to. I sat with a nonprofit that's led by a survivor, and she has employed all other women who are survivors, and they're out educating. And so I learned all about this issue and heard their stories. And then when it was time to leave, I went to the airport and I waited in line, and in line was just a sea of at least 100 young women wearing the uniforms of their recruitment agencies with signs on their shirts saying Saudi Arabia or other countries. And I knew from talking with these women that they probably don't have the full picture of what
wow.
they're going to face. So people need to be free to migrate and pursue better opportunities, but they should have contracts that they can read and understand. They should know their rights so that they should have a phone number to call if something goes wrong. So these are some of the strategies.
Hmm. Oh my goodness. As you were sharing that, I cannot imagine being somewhere all alone, not knowing what to do, not knowing who to contact, how to get help in a given situation. If you've ever been slightly lost, even within your own city or within your own state or commonwealth, at least you're still at home in a sense, right? You're still in your own country. You know that someone's going to say, "Oh yeah, the freeway's that way, the highway's over there, the train, the plane, whatever, it's nearby." Someone is going to be able to help you, and that everyone also speaks the same language. So just as you're talking, going, "Oh my goodness," each time it's kind of like a drop down, like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, that poor person." Like, it must be frightening, and I'm so glad that someone is addressing that. So, oh wow, thank you. I'm sure that really kind of rang true for someone going, "I've been in a situation where I needed someone to help me," and what that feels like, and perhaps that's a way that they can get involved. Now, my last question for you, and thank you for being such a good sport about explaining all of this and really helping us to understand more about what's going on. How can media, be it that it is legacy media or independent media, or folks that just want to help share the story, how can we be more effective in getting the word out? Is there any way that we need to step up and be more responsible as individual peoples trying to help the greater good?
Oh, that's an amazing question. I love that. And Dr. Angela, you are doing that, and you feature these stories and you bring on new voices. I think looking for new voices is great. I mean, there are many people who don't have a lot of experience talking to any kind of media. And so welcoming those folks and at the same time offering them a kind, soft landing, maybe a little bit of embedded sort of training along the way. Hey, here's how this is going to go really well. I try to with colleagues, bring them along to the process. It's one thing if you're talking to a reporter for a hard news outlet, you really do need to be prepared. You need to know what's on the record, what's not, how a quote could be used. Maybe you won't like how it turns out. That's one end of the spectrum. But then there's kind of the realm that we're in, which is storytelling, which is really meant to bring light to issues. And so it's a great place for people to start and get their story out. I had a wonderful experience with colleagues. For instance, in Bangladesh, we have a program there to prevent girls from being pulled into sex trafficking. And one of the things that the team learned is that mothers were being prevented from registering their children with birth certificates because the law required a father's signature. And these mothers were working in brothels, so there was no father. And so the team and our partners figured out there was a line in the law that was not being used. And if they could go and certify that the mothers and the children were from this particular brothel area, the authorities would allow them to get registered. And so they registered over 400 kids since the latter end of last year. Huge win. And so when we found out this is a real news story now. And so we connected with the Guardian, but it is not just anybody at the Guardian. It's the Guardian's desk where they do work on development stories and a reporter who we could look at his work and see that he's someone who cares about social issues. And there was just a wonderful interaction with our head of program, Khalida Akhtar. So, that actually led to the government being really proud of the collaboration. And there were a couple of kids whose registration was stuck, and the government and so the government said, "We're really proud of this. This is great." And we said, "Well, there are a couple kids who are stuck," and they said, "We'll get it done immediately." So it helps to push things forward.
Yeah, it does. Oh my goodness. That is something to definitely to smile about, to cheer about, to
Yeah.
say, listen, we are actually making a difference. Just that perspective of someone stepping up and say, well, what can I do? How can I help? And just it's not just here locally, it's you can be a local person making a global difference simply because you raised your hand and said, how can I help? Can I be of service in any way? And I love it. I love it. I am definitely someone who's always going to lend a microphone to someone who is trying to make positive change in the world. And I am so glad that you were able to come and spend some time with me here today and tell us about this thing that's going on in the world. I pray that someone will raise their hand and say, how can I help? You guys are doing amazing work. Dr. Xanthe, thank you so much for visiting with me here today on Passioneer Magazine, the podcast. Now, of course, your information is here on the screen for those that are watching the video, or for those listening in, if they want to reach out to you, find out more about the work that you're doing, what is the best way to do that?
So freedomfund.org, you can sign up there for our newsletter. You can get on our socials. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Xanthe Scharff, and I'll look forward to connecting with you all. And Dr. Angela, thank you so much for having me and for everything that you do to lift up these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Passioneer Magazine, the podcast.